Hello, game devs. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the basics of how Unity codes and what kind of creations we can make with it, what the basics of Unity code is, and kind of like the layout of everything. One thing to note is that Unity actually supports multiple different scripting or coding systems. It supports both C# and JavaScript, and I think it still supports Boo, which no one uses, but it is a thing. So what we're going to be using is completely in C#. That's mostly just because I know C# and I come from a game development perspective where we use C# more. If you're in the web development game or games that are on web, often you might find JavaScript kind of engines. So it really doesn't matter, but we're just going to be using C# for now. And we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call that _scripts. So Unity is really interesting. And from this scripts folder, we're going to create a C# script. And we're going to rename this something specific. Hello world. It's always the first thing we do is we make a hello world. And when we double click on it, it'll open up Visual Studio or maybe MonoDevelop if you have that installed. Either one's fine, as long as you have a code editor. All right. And here we have our code. So one of the first things that we notice here is the first 3 lines are using something. This is lines of code that say, hey, use these libraries of information so that we can create code. Because what Unity is doing is it has what we call libraries or groups of code that someone else has written that are such basic things that every game needs that someone else wrote it for us. All we have to do is access it. Think about like animation, right? How do you go from, you have to tell the computer, okay, when you're done with frame 1, load frame 2, and then go to frame 3, and then go to frame 4, and do it in this time period. So that's what Unity does, is it took care of all of that stuff. And so now all we have to say is animate thing, use these photos, and it'll do it for us. So these are the basic things we're going to use. There are more later on that you might end up using. If you're familiar with like C++, this is like include, whatever. The other thing you must notice is hello world is the same line. This says public class hello world : mono behavior, and the file is also called hello world. Sometimes when people create files, C# files, sometimes these don't match. So right now in Unity, if we go to the console, whoops, ignore that. So in Unity, if we go to the console here, the console is where we see errors. And right now there are none, which is great. And it's mostly because our hello world code isn't in the world. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to a project view, and we're going to drag hello world onto the plane. Okay, let's drag it onto the plane. So if you drag it out here, it'll add it automatically. And look at that. It's a script, a little component. And that's actually kind of the weird thing that is different from object-oriented programming, which we can talk about later in detail. But Unity is component-based programming. What that means is although your code can talk to each other, it's not necessary for it to do so. And the game object, which is just an object with a transform, what we do is we drag code snippets onto it, and then all of that code will run it together. So if there's issues because 2 pieces of code are using the same button or something, that'll run into errors, and that's up to you to fix and solve. But we just drag stuff on, and then it will work in the game. And if we go to our console, it says everything is fine. There are no warnings, no messages, and no errors. And if we hit play, we should also see no messages, no warnings, no errors. See, there you go. See that little bit right here, this warning, play one shot was called with a null audio clip. We can ignore that because it's a warning, and also the warning has to do with the code that we added for this first-person camera. So just ignore that as we're going through. But we can hit clear to get rid of it when we're done with the game. Okay. So in a computer, everything is running off of the processor. The processor, just like in video games, right? Frames per second, right? So a processor is trying to run usually 60 frames per second, and which means it's trying to execute a command 60 times every single second. This here is the code that starts up. You could delete it if you would like to, but this is the start command. So when this piece of code, hello world, loads into the game, anything inside of these two braces is going to be run once. So let's take a look. Let's type in debug.log, open parenthesis, quote, hello world. All right. So from here, we go into our game, and we go into our console, because we like to use the console to monitor messages. And we're going to hit clear just because we don't need those old messages. And we're going to hit play. And now, oops, I have to put messages on. Look at that, hello world. I'm going to press play again because my message button wasn't on. And it'll pop up right there. Hello world. There you go. The other thing you might notice is that there's a 1 here. That's because the message is only fired off once. Now let's compare that with the update function. The update function will play every frame. Okay? Hello world start, I'm going to call it. I'm going to put another one in here. Oops, I'm going to hit debug log update me. Once we go back, there we go. Once we're back in Unity, I'm going to hit clear, and I'm going to hit play. And what we're going to notice is that the update me line is going to count over and over and over again. 5 to 5. Look at it go. It just keeps going up and going up and going up. So when we use update, it's going to do things automatically over and over and over again. Sometimes this is where issues come along where games don't run properly because something's very processor intensive is happening. But those are the two different states. And one of the things you might also notice if I have Hello World selected is I can read the code pretty quickly right away. So that can be really helpful for me when I want to do things in here. So what about syntax and that kind of thing? So we're using C#, and you can you can look online, but we can quickly read a couple things here. The first thing is this is a brace, and it encapsulates code. So this brace is related to the brace at the end, and you can see that in my Microsoft editor. And let me increase the font size. Just realized. Pretty sure, yeah, there you go. So there we go. That way everyone can read it. So in here we have a brace, and this brace is corresponding to this brace, and you can actually kind of see the highlighting a little bit. If you click on them, that's really helpful. All of this stuff is called IntelliSense, when it will tell you where the other piece is. So these braces are really important. This is a function. We can create our own functions, and functions are really just like groups of code that we want to update, we want to create. So void my code. And then we need to set parentheses. And if you notice, it automatically sets parentheses. And if we wanted to set this up, we also have to open a brace, and it adds a close brace. And I like to just hit enter. And now we have all the code in here that we could put any code we want in here. Right now, though, there's nothing in it. So these are parentheses. I also want to show you another object. This is a bracket. And we want to use the correct terminology just because we have to use all of these, but these are called brackets, okay? And these things here are braces. So inside of our, code, we're gonna say //. Now, when anything looks green, which is just like this update is called once per frame, what it is a comment. And we want to comment our code a lot. We want to put information here to tell us what it is we were doing, because even we can't remember everything. But my code is going to fire a message once. And I am then going to add a line of code. And we already typed this in, and I didn't really explain it a lot. But let's go through it now. So if we type in debug, this is a set of code that Unity developers have created is called debug. And if we hit period, it allows us to see all the things that debug can do. And this is, again, where IntelliSense becomes really... And this, again, becomes where IntelliSense is really helpful. This will show you every single thing. Log error, log warning, assert. So there's a bunch of things in there. We're not going to use all of them, but I'm going to just use log, which means to write down. And then I'm going to open the parenthesis. And then I'm going to use quotes. Now, anything inside of a quote is called a string. A string is a word or set of words or letters, but it's not code words. It's the actual words that you want to display. So we're going to say my function runs properly. Okay. And we're going to hit semicolon to end it. Now, if you notice, there's error messages that are popping up on the bottom here. So if I delete that semicolon, that means that my line of code isn't ended. And it says, hey, I think you're supposed to put a semicolon here. Let's go to Unity and take a look. Actually, I can't. There's this error here. It says, hey, error CS 1002 semicolon expected. And this is line 22. See that? Line 22. So if we go in here to our code, we can look at line 22. And it looks like our code doesn't have a semicolon. So I'm going to put that back in there. Or before we do that, let's go see if we can press play. And we can't. So if we press play, all compiler errors have to be fixed. So that's the thing we have to take a look at is have to fix those compiler errors. And when I mentioned that GitHub in the GitHub assignment, I said never check in a project if it's broken. This is what I mean. Don't check your project in if it's broken. You can check it into your personal server, but don't submit it to the GitHub server, the remote one. That can be a recipe for disaster because then it'll be broken all the time, and then someone's got to fix it in order to do stuff. It's a big pain in the butt. So let's fix our code. There we are. This function is never called. So we need to actually call it because it doesn't say my function runs properly, right? And I don't want to put it in the update function. In fact, I want to get rid of the update line altogether just because it's firing all the time. And I want to instead, I'm maybe going to call my function from the start. So void start, I'm going to reference my code here, my code, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, semicolon. Now, this is how we call another function inside of our code. So all I'm doing here is I'm saying this line is saying, hey, go down here to my code, the function, and do whatever it says right here at the start command. And let's see what happens now. My function runs properly. Look at that. Fired off once. Down here in the debug log. So now we know it runs. But maybe we want to have some interaction, right? So how do we get an object to maybe run this error message when we want it to, right? Like when we want to walk through something like a trigger, right? So let's create a new game object, a 3D game object. Let's make a cube, and let's scale it up a bunch. And we're gonna move it over here. And we are going to get rid of the mesh renderer. We don't want to see it. It's an invisible box. And we'll make it much bigger too. And over here. So that invisible box is something you can touch. The cube's over there. The player is... Oh, okay, so I have to turn around. I'm going to use the scene view on the left there and the game view here. That way I can see, move around. This is why the scene view can be very helpful. All right, so what we want to do is we want to have the player run into the box, and to do that, we're gonna select the box. We have removed the mesh renderer here, and so it's just a blank area. I'm gonna move this over a little bit. Yeah. It's going to be right on top of this sphere over here, so we can identify where it's at. And then what we want to do... Oh, I knew what was happening. So one of the things that I messed up on is that we attached this Hello World script to the plane. So we're going to remove that. And then this box, which... oops. It looks like its trigger is off. So when the player runs into this trigger, it is going to fire that off. The other thing we're going to need to do is actually attach the script to the player this time. So we're going to select the player, and the player has a rigid body and a capsule collider. So we're going to add component, and we're going to add component. Oops. What did we call it? New script. Oops, not a new script. Hello World, that's what we called it. So add component, Hello World. And as you can see, your code will pop up here. It's just a component like anything else. And now from here, we should be able to collide with... All right, so we're going to create a box. We're going to turn off the mesh render. If we want, we can turn it back on, but I don't care for it. And we've got this box collider here. And we have the Hello World script attached to the box collider. Okay, so it was attached to the plane. You can remove it from the plane now, so that we don't double up on it. If it happens, if it's still on there, it's fine. And then we've got a new piece of code. We're gonna say void OnCollisionEnter, and as you can see, OnCollisionEnter, there's a bunch of different ones. This is enter, there's exit, and then there's like repeated, so if you're doing consistent damage, OnCollisionStay. And then if I hit tab, it automatically completes it for me. Very, very helpful. Make sure there's no spelling errors. And then from here, I'm just gonna run my code, semicolon. So whenever there's a collision, run my code, and my code says debug log, my function runs properly. Now, hopefully, if we press play, we'll be able to maneuver our character. Let's see, where is it? It's coming around. Right now, you can see hello world, my function runs properly is 1 and 1. And I'm going to walk over to that cube and see what happens. Bam, look at that. My function runs properly got triggered again and again and again. Because every time I hit this cube wall, and right now it's I'm not going through it, but that's okay. Every time I hit that collision, it fires off another message. So in that way, we can quickly create interactive experiences just through that. So send me any questions. Ask questions on the Discord server. Whatever you need to do, but take a look and let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in class.